talk about this now with the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary, so East Palestine residents, as you heard there, they say they're not getting enough help from Norfolk Southern, which caused all this misery, and that railway transportation safety legislation, co-sponsored in the Senate by Republican Senator Vance and Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown, it's stalled. Why is it stalled? Who is behind stalling it?
Well, that's something that members of Congress need to answer. It's been almost a year. That clip that you just played of that resident speaking in the Senate about the need for this legislation is something like 10 months ago, and still there has been no action in Congress. It's striking to me that you have this bipartisan legislation that's just been sitting there waiting its turn. We've taken a lot of steps as a department with the authorities we have under the current law, but we need Congress to do more, and Congress could be doing more right now. My question to anybody who is in a position to advance this, especially a number of House Republicans who have sought over the course of the last year to make a partisan issue out of the pain of what happened in East Palestine, is what are you doing right now to make sure that we don't get to the 1 year mark, which is just a few days away, and still have no action? There is no excuse for it to be a year since that crash in East Palestine and have the Railway Safety Act still waiting its turn on Capitol Hill.
I know, but give me some candor here. Why has it not been introduced? I mean, Senator Sherrod Brown, the Democrat from Ohio, says he's worried because the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, he said, quote, is pretty close to the railroad lobby. Is that the reason why it hasn't been introduced on the House? And what about the Senate, where Democrats control the Senate? How come Chuck Schumer hasn't introduced this?
Well, I can't speak for Speaker Johnson, but I am concerned about the influence that the railroad industry lobby has here. Look, we pushed hard for this, and the railroad industry lobby famously has had a lot of power. They helped in the last administration to weaken some railroad safety regulations. They've resisted some of the safety regulations that I and we at the Department of Transportation are continuing to advance. Now, in the Senate, at least there was that movement in committee. I think there's some question about whether to bring it to the floor, whether there are the 60 votes that you need in the Senate in order to get that done, as well as whether the House is ready. But this shouldn't be a bipartisan issue. I don't know why Republicans would be or should be any less likely to vote for this than Democrats. It's got bipartisan sponsorship. I think the vast majority of Americans believe it ought to be done. And part of how Congress and this country need to do right by people in East Palestine, like the people who were interviewed there, in addition to work that's being done to hold Norfolk Southern accountable for cleaning up the mess they made, is to make sure that the next community doesn't go through that. Some of the provisions in this legislation include tougher penalties that could change the behavior of the railroads, accelerating the adoption of tank cars that would be stronger in many incidents and derailments that could lead to a hazardous materials release, making sure there are more requirements for letting emergency responders know when hazardous materials are coming through their community. We've already funded a lot of work to train first responders, but Congress could put way more teeth into those capabilities. It's long past time for there to be action.
Isn't it true that the punishment for an airline for being like a half hour late or an hour late is worse than the punishment that can be given to a railway for a crash that has a fatality?
It can be. Even in an extreme situation with an egregious violation, the most that my department is able to penalize a railroad company is in the neighborhood of $200,000. I think we all know that when you have Class 1 railroads, freight companies that are multi-billion-dollar corporations and very profitable ones at that, the threat of a fine that's maybe $250,000 isn't enough to make them change their economics. We could change that. We could change that right now if Congress allowed us to do, which is one of the many needed provisions that, again, are just waiting their turn in this Railway Safety Act. And I'm just amazed that there are so many members of Congress who, as of today, almost a year out, have yet to go on the record whether they're for or against this bill, because they sure as hell didn't mind going on the record when they thought they could score points off of this issue along the way in the last 11 months.
Well, it's not just Congress, right? Because some residents of East Palestine, plus Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, are calling on FEMA to approve Governor DeWine's disaster declaration. That would unlock additional resources from the federal government, possibly providing ongoing health screenings and benefits to residents. But the Biden administration refuses to do that. They say a disaster declaration does not apply because it's not a natural disaster. They say Norfolk Southern is responsible. So is that disaster declaration still just off the table for these residents who are clearly suffering?
Look, leaving aside, I don't know all the legalities of the emergency management process. I do know what we can do as a department to make sure that railroads are safer, and we've been taking action on everything from focused inspection of railroads to making sure that there's better hazardous material-related regulation to just investing in better railroad infrastructure. I know that the EPA has been acting to hold Norfolk Southern accountable and make sure that all of that cleanup takes place. Anything that can be done within the limits of the law, this administration is going to do. Because when I talk to people in East Palestine who I got to know when I visited in the aftermath of this crash, there's two things I hear. One is that they don't want this to happen to anyone else, and another is that they don't want to be forgotten.
President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law is one of his major achievements in office. Right now, you're in Florida, which has gotten billions of dollars in infrastructure funding. Still, the president is facing low approval ratings and a tough re-election battle. Why do you think he's in such tough shape?
Well, what I know is that we're responsible for telling a story that isn't exactly going to advertise itself. Now, I'm not going to speak to the campaign and election side because I'm here in an official capacity, but I'll say this. This administration has a lot to be proud of and has done so much good for so many people in so many parts of the country, including right here in Florida, where billions of dollars have come directly because of President Biden and that infrastructure package. We're doing railroad safety in Broward County. We're doing truck parking along I-4. We've improved the ports of Miami, the port of Tampa, and we're going to continue doing that. Even though Governor DeSantis has sent some of that money back to Washington unspent, we're still delivering billions of dollars of value and need to make sure everybody understands that. I know that it's our job to get that message across. I just spoke to people from the International Union of Operating Engineers, their national gathering here in Fort Lauderdale. They are over 400,000 members, record membership and record job creation in construction, manufacturing, and there's much more where this came from thanks to the president's leadership on infrastructure.
Speaking of the president, he still has not visited East Palestine, Ohio. I don't know why that is. That doesn't seem to make much sense to me. But if Congress needs pressure to get this done, why wouldn't he just go to East Palestine and use the bully pulpit the way that, Harry S. Truman would do, try to shame Congress into passing that? Why is that not even like an idea that the White House would contemplate?
I don't have any updates on the scheduling front for the White House, but what I can tell you is it shouldn't take anything more than we've already seen happen for Congress to act. I don't know why we have to persuade anybody to do something that members in both parties claim to care about, which is to make our railroads safer. President Biden's administration and our department, we're doing it with funding to improve infrastructure. We're doing it with the authorities we have on hazardous material. We're doing it with our rulemaking authorities, but Congress has to do its part. Why would they let it get to a year and still fail to act?
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, thank you so much.